We're not taught that emotions work on an arc.
On an all-new Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers.
And we're afraid it's never going to end. So of course I'm going to disconnect from it. That's just a sign of intelligence.
We're connecting with Dr. Brooke Stuart.
So do you think one of the biggest issues with the rise in mental health issues right now is a disconnection from self and our intuition?
I think you just nailed it.
And we're talking mental health.
Such a access to the answer of depression is expression as our full selves. But then it asks that question of who are we?
Embracing our most authentic selves.
Just beginning to tap into that voice, I find, can be a big part of actually releasing, allowing that expression to get it out of the body.
And learning to love our life.
I just see sparkles in my patients' eyes when it's oh my gosh, you're not just sitting here telling me that I have to cope with life's many challenges.
To me, that sounds like it's just bringing in hope.
On an all-new Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers. Welcome to Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers, a podcast dedicated to those seeking a more fulfilled and purposeful life through thought-provoking conversation, spiritual exploration, and authentic connections. The intentional movement has begun, and if you found yourself here, you are a part of it. Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers starts now.
Hi, Dr. Brooke. Welcome to Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers. I'm excited to have this conversation today because it's a big topic that keeps coming up on the show that I think we're going to jump into. And who knows what else we're going to talk about. But I love that you're going to be able to bring your experience and all of your wisdom to the topic of mental health and women, and then combining our real intuition and our instincts with the concept of dealing with our mental health situation, because I feel like a lot of people are faced with mental health issues these days. So welcome. I'm so excited to touch base with you.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's such an important topic in the age where stress is through the roof and social media and all of these ways that we can compare ourselves to other people. I was actually in the Taylor Swift Eras Tour movie the other day, and I literally started bawling because I started to think, she is just this woman who's taking up space and really owning the space that she's already in, allowing herself to express her voice. And as we spoke about over the phone, I think such a access to the answer of depression is expression as our full selves. But then it asks that question of who are we? What is our signature essence? How can I begin to express in a way that represents who I truly am? So it's such an interesting topic. And now with shows like yours and building this sort of awareness, it's now more than ever, we have choices available to us to actually go down that route and actually explore and see what's resonant with us. So I am so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I mean, I love it. And even just now, you hit on so many big topics that I think are contributing to this, who are we, and the whole place that we go in our head and worry about so much what other people think about us. But you mentioned the word comparison or owning ourselves or taking up the stage and showing our presence. I mean, these are big things that especially as women, and this show is for everyone, but we talk a lot about women issues here. And as women, we have been conditioned not to take up that space, not to show up who we are, to be nice, to play the rules, to play the game. And I mean, you are so accurate in saying Taylor Swift is almost throwing that in the face of everyone. Look at her career. Look at where she came from. Look at all the situation she's had with Kanye and things like that, where people try and take her voice or try and push her down. And then it's no, I am here. And I mean, my husband and I have talked about her quite a bit because our niece is obsessed with her. And it's I don't know that there's a bigger name on the planet right now than Taylor Swift. She has single-handedly changed our economy. So what a great example as a woman to stand up, own your voice, and stand in your truth. I mean, that's brilliant.
100%. And I think one of the interesting parts about her, because I love her, I'm such a fan, but I love that she explores these parts of her and really gives them a voice and a name and a song and an expression. And it's from her authentic self, from who she truly is, she's exploring these parts of herself with her audience. And I think that's one of the reasons she is so resonant, but she always comes back to one of the things that I love about her is her intelligence. And always you can tell she has a great team around her. She is incredible, where it's not like this reflex sort of like reaction from her. She takes her time, she takes a breath, and she decides like literally what is her next move going to be. But in the wake of really being intentional about connecting to her audience, connecting to herself, finding that authenticity. And I think it's so empowering. And I loved the Eras Tour movie. I didn't get to go to the actual concert, so I felt like that was such a gift to be able to have that.
Well, connection is key. And that's where I think a lot of us get lost, in a world where we are so able to connect. We can connect with people all over the place. I mean, I speak on this podcast to people all around the world. It's crazy to me, like how that this has opened up this audience and this ability to really communicate with all these people. But in a world that we can do that, we are so disconnected. And I think that's where we are losing this connection to self. This is where the mental health issues are coming in. This is where we're seeking answers and we're seeking more. But like, and just continuing on with the Taylor Swift conversation, she is so connected because she is authentic. Like she is herself. And that's what allows her to connect with people. She doesn't care what other people say or think. She doesn't just follow the rules because this is how you do it. She does it what works for her and she shows up as herself. And I think that's what we are missing in this world right now. We curate so much of how we show up in the world that we don't even know ourselves, let alone how to show up as ourselves.
100%. I actually, and I'll stop on the whole Taylor Swift rant, but it's I don't want to bore anyone, but one of the things I love about her songs that I found so insightful is that when the "Hi, I'm the problem, it's me" sort of song, I have the shirt now.
Yeah.
But basically, she starts as like it's like in this dark place, the song, and then it lightens up throughout, and at the end, she's kind of like laughing about like "Hi, I'm the problem, it's me," like the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I think that there's something really beautiful because I think that's very representative of an intrinsic internal process when you are clearing out where we start, where we have those shame walls. And there's this darkness to feeling like, oh, a part of me is the problem. But then we actually can come into the lightness of it, receive the messages, and allow them to take hold and allow our perspective to shift and develop and almost literally allowing it to fall off as we choose so intentionally to continue to step into that era of growth. And so I think that we're always faced with that choice of, okay, what do I want to do with this situation? Do I want to reflex or react? And sometimes in the moment, it's so difficult, and that's what we find ourselves doing. But after the fact, that's when I find it's increasingly important to think about what would have I rather done in that space? Like, what would have I said? What would have been authentic to me in that space? Like if I was, and I'll have my patients a lot of times really work on this, like go back to that time that still kind of haunts you or bothers you or you have shame walls around, and go back to it and actually begin to look at what you would say from all the growth that you've attained now. Who are you? What would represent? What would align with your intention? And just start to speak those words, because in the future, it will be so easy to carry those lessons forward, and that time lapse will begin to integrate, where at first it may feel like kind of like faking it, but that's just the beginning of a process. So kind of removing out that imposter syndrome and letting ourselves just begin and tap into that progress over perfection sort of aspect. So I think that I love that part of the song, how the energy changes.
Well, do you think that's what really stunts us in our growth or in our mental state, is that we get so caught up in that shame or what I woulda, shoulda, coulda done, as opposed to looking at it more as like you're talking about, a process of growth and an ability to move forward and an ability to almost like process these different emotions and feelings and things that come through as a learning experience so that we can move forward faster, quicker, and a better timeline. But we kind of don't look at it like that. We shame ourselves and we stick ourselves into these little boxes of like, oh, I did this so wrong. And we are so critical of ourselves. Is that what keeps us in that like lower vibration and that lower state?
I absolutely think so. I was playing tennis this morning and I was talking to a guy and I said, I'm really working on not saying sorry after I hit a bad shot. And
Yes.
he said to me, he goes, that's just who we are. And I thought to myself, I think that's the human aspect of who we are, where we're always messing up, but then we have this authentic self kind of made in that image and likeness of God. Like, what is your best self? What is your creator self? And how can you authentically begin to believe in your wholeness, completion, perfection? That's always that where we can always begin to access that growth oriented mindset and make moves forward. But we can also bring the light of that awareness into the parts of us that are apologetic, that do feel shame, that do feel guilt. So if we have like a structural sort of integrity to our authentic self, and I always explain this in a first visit to a patient because I want them to know how I'm seeing them, where I'm coming from. I want them to know that I see them as important, capable, unique, which I kind of categorize in that what category. So the who you are is like creator of your reality, simply because you have the power to choose choices, how you perceive, interact with, interpret the world, the practical choices you make each day. Who you are not is not solely what you eat, not the choices that you made. I even saw a quote on Instagram once that you are your worst day. And I'm like, well, that belief will tear you down. Let's clean that out of the feed, delete and block. But no. And then bye. But in the what, thinking about like you're unique, like each individual is unique. So we have to accommodate for that when we're creating treatment plans, but also in how we work together and also primarily how you see yourself and accessing that beautiful, that full of being, all of these things that are intrinsic to each and every person on this earth, but you can actually begin to awaken to and embody. And then I think a lot about the present moment. So who, what, where, present moment, where we can review the past without having to relive it or directly re-experience it. But we can also begin to choose new choices in the here and now and open up to that vision of what we see for ourselves in the future, making those choices that are in alignment. So I often will recommend that my patients take that pause, just connect with their heart, plug right in, and just send that very strategic reminder of who, what, where as we navigate the parts that are darker and deeper and that we have to traverse to access the gemstones that are innately within them. So I always set up the conversation in that way because that's what will keep us arrested in development. But if we have like this way out that's unshakable, because if you think about performance, right, and why suicide rates could possibly be going up in women or why we're feeling intense anxiety or states of depression, I think so often it's because we're trying to figure out these highs and lows. And if we believe that our identity is tied up in our performance in the highs and lows, or that I'm feeling bloated today or something like that, and I can't take a picture because I'm puffy, it's like, well, that changing it up and really seeing yourself for who, what, where, and having a really good idea of what that means to you allows us to begin to access the choices that we can take pride in and actually just plugging into that next choice that can build our self-confidence because it's in alignment with that field of who we are, how we're expanding versus distressed and contracting. That's what will begin to break these cycles, set us free, and get us off that high and low train I see so often, because so much of that stability and that sending the signal of safety so often has to do with how we respond to the situation. How do I decide to perceive it? Not how do I immediately perceive it, because the parts of me are reflexing to try to protect me in that survival mode where I might fight, flight, freeze, appease. But how do I, when the noise dies down, when I access my heart, when I choose to connect versus disconnect, dissociate, disembody, when I choose to embody this experience and see this through the lens of who I am, how do I choose to connect? What choice will I take pride in? What is that growth-oriented choice? Because so often as we're growing, as we go, kind of the whole grow as we go mindset, kind of removing the perfection, tapping into progress and that betterment. So often we begin to realize, you know what? I'm going to go where I grow too. I'm not just going to grow as I go, even though that's highly important to have the skill set to begin to develop and do that. But also we begin to gain this confidence that I actually feel safer and more alive, more that my life takes on more meaning when I actually choose to go into and lean into the experiences where I grow as well. So I think, just to kind of like frame the conversation and put some framework as we kind of like go exploring through it, I figured that might be important for the audience to know that that's what I'm thinking about as we kind of engage.
Well, I mean, there are so many really important things you said there. I mean, I know we want to talk about this rising rate of women and facing things like suicide and depression and like that, because it seems to be, I don't know if it's on the rise, but I know it's definitely something that keeps coming up on this show. And so I definitely would love your take on that, because it's crazy to me that this is such a big thing. But I wonder if it is like our state of perfection. I wonder if it's like our shame spirals. I wonder if it's that up and down that we don't know how to ride the waves. Like, I wonder where that is, the comparison that it's coming from. But another thing you just said that I absolutely love that I've never heard is like, we want to review our life and not relive these scenarios. Like, we do that. We keep ourselves stuck in these situations and those feelings and emotions, as opposed to taking our perception, stepping out of it, stepping away, and kind of like looking at a situation almost as an observer. And I think we need to create more of that observer in our life. And that might allow us to work through these emotions that are keeping us stuck and in a state of such desperation that we're like, I just don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah. Yes. 100%. I always think about how some initial choices that we can always make, because I really believe in how perception is medicine, and how when we begin to open up to that, our life could possibly be for us, even though parts of us will certainly feel like it's happening to us. Parts of us may have suicidal thoughts. Parts of us may feel like there is no way out, that we're stuck, that we're frustrated. But if we can continue to build that structural integrity from the inside out, that, you know what, maybe there's meaning in here, maybe this is for me, then we can begin to connect. We have more of a way to actually connect versus disconnect, and actually begin to simply look at our experiences, to observe them. We're more open and curious, wondering, okay, what's in this? Let me explore this. And in those questions, I find that it really connects us. It's like walking ourselves home through, like taking a little bridge to the other side of the challenge, actually alchemizing it into an opportunity, actually learning from our experiences by possibly asking questions like, what do I need to learn and see from this experience? Just allowing ourselves, like, how can I grow through this experience? What is the next best choice that I can make? And just allowing ourselves to ask these questions without even necessarily receiving an answer right away can be such a beautiful part of connecting to the process, where we actually, and once we learn what we need to learn, obviously, like, we've experienced it, like we've all experienced it, like, it's like things come full circle, and a neutrality where something was charged, a neutrality begins to exist, because there's this understanding and there's this compassion. And it doesn't mean to reflex and try to repair and go back into toxic experiences or relationships, but it definitely means that we can begin to allow the lessons to take hold and then decide what feels healthy for me. What actually empowers my system, what creates that expansion and that freedom, and what feels like health to me in this moment, knowing that, of course, it can change, but in this moment, like, what feels like health, what feels like growth, authentically, not from the space of the ego, trying to create like this, like, sort of like looking up and down and superiority, inferiority, just like beginning to wash that away and just access that. Let me, connect and look at and learn from and begin to let go, and also step into and develop what feels innately like me, that empowers my system.
So how do we start to create that neutral space? Because like when we are in a down state, and I know what you're talking about. We are the creators of our reality. And if we can look at what's going on in our life, that it's happening for us, not to us, we are creating this. Maybe it's a lesson we need to learn, or maybe it's choices that we've made in the past, which when you look at it that way, that's when you start to go into that shame, guilt, like, oh, I created this scenario. But sometimes it's like a really bad situation that you find yourself in. How do we work ourselves out of that? But I mean, and find that neutral ground.
I love that question. So I think that exactly like that, I create my reality can feel like daunting. I think that actually the fear-based model of that can trigger OCD, like where I have to knock 6 times or because I think all of us innately have this. Yeah, hello. I think that so often when we know we have this power inside of ourselves to actually choose and create, we then become afraid of that power because we don't like what we necessarily created in the past. And so we're thinking like, oh, wow. But also I think it's so important to like, instead of like thinking, oh, I created that traumatic experience, I'm to blame. It's more along the lines of like letting it neutralize. So looking at it as more of along the lines of like, it is what it is, but then it's what I make it. It's what I make it moving forward. So often when we disconnect and we really get caught in the victim villain model, it's the hard part about that, the trap about that. And I've had so many patients with so many difficult things that they've been through, but I always open up the space of like, I know this happened to you. I know this happened to you. This was completely, like it's like a sword, right? But at the same time, if we can be these multidimensional humans where we have this part of us, but we're also open to the meaning of like, it is what it is. And then it's what I make it. I find that such a big way of beginning to take our power back. But that involves the commitment to removing the blame of self in terms of how we see ourselves. And it's more along the lines of beginning to, that's how I think one of the ways we can begin to remove the shame is by beginning to identify like, yes, a part of me is blaming it, but I don't actually see that as my truth. I'm going to begin to understand how those actions were actually protective, or understand myself as to why I reflexed into those actions that I may not be proud of. But how can I learn from that experience? And that alone, I think, begins to bring it more full circle and more neutralized, because it's, so many of our patterns. And Gabor Mate talks a lot about this. And he has a whole course called Compassionate Inquiry that I went through. And he's just this beautiful voice in the holistic health world. And he talks a lot about how it doesn't just start with you. Like, it's like these traits are genetically, they're found in our DNA. So it doesn't just start with you. But what's really interesting in the research that they're finding now is that it could actually potentially, you can be a very influential part of that. It ends with you by the way that your choices, by the way you shift your choices in the here and now. And I think that has a lot to do with growing our permission field. I think one of the beautiful parts of social media and the internet and all of the people we can access and attain information from is that we're beginning to see like, ooh, how does this person do things? What creates expansion? What could create expansion for me? Kind of like the permission field of being able to express and say things that may have been silenced in the past, but now it's giving like a little, like there's awareness, there's a voice there, there's this healing sense of expression. So no longer do I have to feel oppressed and then suppress and repress and lock it away into my subconscious, unconscious, and into my body. Now I can actually begin to speak. So when I feel a certain way, I feel ashamed, I feel blamed, or I'm blaming myself, right? Like, it's like we can begin to like really use our linguistics in a powerful way of like, a part of me feels ashamed, a part of me is blaming myself. And then we can step in with like sort of like that capital I, that I, like, now how do I see it? I'm beginning to bring the light of my awareness into these parts, but how do I see it? And just beginning to tap into that voice, I find, can be a big part of like actually releasing, allowing that expression to get it out of the body. And a lot of times I'll recommend that my patients, like if whether it's in the shower, in the car, on a walk, just let yourself say things out loud. Write it down if that feels better. But get clear on like what it is. Like let it go through all the edits, all the drafts, kind of referencing that Taylor Swift song. It's like go through all the dark, deep moments and let it turn into the light of day. And you will know that you now have it versus it having you when it neutralizes. So I think when that actually, like when kind of like the charge begins to like free and you see if it still feels charged, there's typically something in it. Because it's catching your and from my perspective, it's catching your undivided attention for a reason. It is meant to be there in your field. And all we need to do is come into it with the authentic self and see it and allow that light of day to begin to dismantle it and really allow to find those gemstones within it. So that's a bit how I think about those things.
Wow. I mean, so much that you're saying here is, I mean, at one point you're talking about like generational curses, like we are passing some of these things and these subconscious beliefs down, which is crazy to me because, you know, you see that kind of talk on social media a lot. And part of it's kind of like, okay, it's just us blaming other people, which kind of brings me back to my other thing I was going to talk about is like taking ownership. You know, if we are creating our reality, taking ownership of what we're creating and the choices that have happened to us, but then also releasing this so that it's not like that guilt and shame. Like, how do we bring those two things together? Like to take ownership and understand that we have a part in it, but also to release it. But then also you're talking about some things are beyond our control that we're being like passed down it's almost like your subconscious beliefs are being passed down, which is really fascinating to me because it's not like, it's like, okay, this gives you blue eyes or brown hair. It's like something else. It's an intangible that's being passed on to us. And is that, like you said, is that written in our DNA or is it being passed down by the environment and the outside influences that are in us? Because even on a different level, like I've noticed things about my daughter that are so much my husband, like so much, but it's not her hair. It's not her eyes. It's like her, I don't give an F attitude. It's her, like, it's her stubbornness to, you know, what you can't tell her to do. She has to want to, like these personality traits, and she's only 4. So it's not, and she's had these traits since the day she was born, pretty much. Like, so it's not like it's like this big, long thing that she's like lived 10 years of her life and just absorbed it from us. And she came in so much like that. But now my son, his traits, he's only 2, is so much like me. And so you think about things passed on genetically as more of like our features and things like that. But you're saying that it's in our DNA, these personality traits.
I think that it's such a nature and nurture thing. And I think that there's the beautiful part about holistic medicine, I feel, is that there's a very much this both and mentality. It's like, I can feel alive and incredible and excited, but I can also feel ashamed and guilty and like, I'm not meant to be here with you on this podcast, right? Like I can feel both at the same time. And I think that nature and nurture is such a good question. And it's certainly both, because I find, and I actually, so my truest beliefs probably like, and I don't know if I should be sharing this or not, but my truest beliefs are that we sign up for this life experience and we choose our parents choose us. And I find that there's something about knowing that everything I've been through, it's not that I did that to myself. It's not, but there's something about it that I find so freeing to know that there's a gemstone in there just meant for me to help me become the best version of myself. And it's interesting because I actually had a therapy session with my mom a couple of weeks ago, and it was so incredible because I kept saying, my therapist was really focused on me using the word I feel, but we had this really, I think, sacred moment where I was saying, like, Mom, I wish you could just say, screw it. Like, you could just realize how awesome you are. And my therapist turns to me and she goes, Brooke, say I wish I could just say, screw it. I wish I could realize how awesome I am. And I think it's both. And I actually see in my parents, when I let them know, like, hey, like you're growing as you're going to, right? You're just, you were a child and you're doing the best you can. And when I've noticed with my parents specifically, when I let them know that like I own my side of the street, like I see that we signed up together. I actually see like the like I see like walls remove and we're more connected because now we can just enjoy each other. Now we can actually work on things, and all of that can begin to fall off because in the center of my heart, all I want is that connection. All I want is to heal and to grow. And I think beginning to have these dynamic conversations and opening up to these new perspectives can be really powerful, because after those conversations, in the wake of them, you feel more connected. Like you can both be like, they can be themselves in the now moment. They don't have to keep apologizing to me for anything they did. Now we can like actually learn and grow together. And so I think we have this beautiful opportunity as families that we can actually begin these conversations where there's receptivity. And there's something really sacred about an apology or about talking about feelings and getting really real with what's coming up. So I think not only like the most interesting part that I've been thinking about with genetics is that idea that if I grow and change, the permission field changes, and then you have that more readily available. And I think that's part of what's people are feeling when they don't feel like themselves, or when they feel disconnected and like there's a lack of purpose. I think that's the first signal, that in sign of like, let me go. For the growth oriented people out there, that's the motivation for them to go and search and to find and to know that that problem is just a solution in the making. And all I have to do is stay with myself to enter into a desirable, like the openness to want to be here. And then to actually lean into that I actually want to be here. I notice this with patients all the time. It's like, at first, I don't even know if they have, they on some level, of course, they're aware that that's a possibility to really enjoy life and its many moments. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't find themselves in the office and into that search mode. But I think there's this idea that like kind of like tolerable, bearable, and then it's like, okay, sometimes it's manageable. But how can we crank it up and create that desirability with our lives? And at first, I think specifically with different aspects of anxiety and depression and suicide, it's like, I don't want to be here. And that is like the first thing. And then it's like, well, maybe I need to be here, right? Maybe I need to be here. But what if we could enter into like this idea before actually experiencing the wanting to be here? What if you could want to be here? Well, that's something we can begin to work with and on. Like, what if I could want to be here? And I find that possibility just begins to like I just see sparkles in my patients' eyes when it's like, oh my gosh, you're not just sitting here telling me that I have to cope with life's many challenges. You're not just sitting here telling me that I have to figure out how to add things to my never-ending holistic things to-do list. You're actually telling me that I can clear my experiences, access more of myself. While yes, coping can be helpful, it's a Band-Aid, right? Like wounds heal under Band-Aids. But if there's a glass stuck in that wound, then the Band-Aid's never fully going to fix it. So let's just go actually looking at what the root cause of the problem is, and then work with the tools that are available to open up to the new possibilities that I'm a firm believer will inevitably set us on the journey to begin to access it. And I actually find a lot of people think that if and when sort of thinking of like, when I get there, I'll feel peace. Yes. I actually directly find that peace straight up comes with a process that yields progress and growth. So once you plug into a process that actually works versus doesn't work, actually creates functionality and clears channels in your system, that's when the freedom and the peace come in. And that's where it's like, okay, in the present moment, we never have to push things out. Just opening up to the possibility can create this exhalation in the system, because we're beginning to connect to what we believe could actually be true and is true in my belief system. But
I mean, God, I can listen to you talk about this stuff forever because it's fascinating. And you're so right. Like this, like, I want to be here. And we're not getting like any, and I've talked about this on the show before, we're in any sort of mindset shift or any sort of big change. If you're starting out like this negative, woe is me, I don't want to be here. You're not going to be like, I am so excited to live my life. I want to be here overnight. You have to have those steps along the way. You have to find that middle ground. So just getting to that point of like, I want to be here. Like, to me, that sounds like it's just bringing in hope. That's what we're looking for.
Totally.
You have to bring in that glimmer of hope that we don't have to just cope with this life, which I think a lot of us go through life with that concept. Like, we have to get through this or we have to cope with this. And like you said, like, you're like, oh, I don't know if I should share it. I am right there with you. I know we sign up on the other side for this life we are living. Now, sometimes I question, why would I sign up for that? Or why, who in their right mind, and I'm not even talking about my life, I'm talking like on like what's going on in the world. Sometimes it's kind of like, wow, some things are really dark and scary. Like, why would anyone sign up for that experience? But then, I come back and I'm like, there is a reason. I obviously didn't sign up for that one experience. So, I'm not going through it, but like someone did for whatever reason. And they, even if their time on life is short, they signed up for that. So
100%.
it's like it's this constant like faith, belief, but then also bringing in that hope of wanting to be here, I think is such a huge thing to think of and bringing ourselves to that space. So I think that is absolutely fascinating of how you can bring people to do that.
And something that first comes to mind as you were touching on those points, I think equality, like that idea, because I think actually probably for you and for me, certainly, it's so much easier for it to be your fault, to blame the self.
Yes.
And I actually find, so that's like that's obviously like one of those big toxic patterns that we're talking about that can inhibit our growth versus allowing ourselves to be ourselves. But I find that especially with women, it's so much easier to really begin to feel like you're the problem and to try to fix the problem, like actually try to fix yourself, fix the broken self. And there can become this addiction. And I actually think that that's where like this women's equality, these movements are really powerful because it just levels the playing field. It's not about being better or worse. It's just about like, hey, look, like this could be a part of you, but this isn't the solution. The solution could be stepping into your power and saying something about what happened to you, actually expressing that belief. Now, the healing, I think, certainly comes on the other side of that, of like, how could this potentially be for me? And how can I step into my power, and what can I let go of? How can I learn and develop from this experience so that there is that full circle moment. But I think a big part of it is removing that shame wall and just coming into that space of equality, because obviously, like if you're looking at men in the workforce, like it's like I might sit here and worry about I just dotted the I incorrectly and wrong, and stay there with that, and that might inhibit my process and growth. Whereas a guy might just be like, who cares? And I actually think that, or they may have not a problem in the world negotiating their salary because it's more of a game, it's competitive. And I think that there's a lot of, obviously there's like toxic femininity and masculinity, but I think that there's a very healthy aspect and something that we can genuinely learn from that, so we can begin to actually see ourselves as those equals and being able to tap into femininity that may feel more authentic, but still to express what it is that you feel is right for you, like what is actually healthy. Because obviously, disconnection can come in such a variety of flavors. It can be an avoidance strategy. It can be a blaming of the self. It can be being highly aggressive and needing to be right. And all of these things disconnect us from just what's coming up, just what we would actually like to say. And so I think that that's the beautiful part of this work, is that the playing field does get leveled naturally, because you're just owning the space that you already exist in. You're just being the person you already are. And so that's where it's like, I may guilt trip myself for not knowing this fast enough or not accessing my tools fast enough. But this is the powerful moment of when you remember to actually remember, Like when you remember to remember, actually remembering is the key. In that moment, you change everything. And so I think that that's the key, is like when you remember to remember, actually remembering is the key then, because that's what creates a completely new experience for you internally, but also a completely new reality creation, because now you know that you deserve to speak up, not because you deserve, but just because you are. And in that, your desires are important. I actually asked myself a question a couple of years ago, and I was like, how would my life change if I really believed I mattered and I was important? And the answers were so simple. It was like, take a shower first thing, actually put on your favorite perfume, like put on, like something that you actually like to wear for work, say the feeling, like say the desire, just place it out loud. And it was such a simple question, but it literally changed how I lived my actual life. And I think sometimes in the psycho-spiritual sort of like segments of personal growth, a lot of times there's this idea that we're fragmented, that the body and the mind are not actually one. But I think actually letting ourselves have these lived experiences, not looking at beauty as superficial, but actually caring about, like, that was one of the big things to me. I was just like, oh, who cares? But like, well, what if I want to do something or look a certain way or have like learn a certain like makeup skill that may seem superficial? It may actually hold a lot of meaning and be important to me. And so I think that's always an interesting conversation too, of kind of like that idea of like removing the distortion and allowing just our desires to exist. Okay, I want to lose 10 pounds. Cool. Okay, I want to feel less anxious. Cool. Let me just actually say whatever it is, little or small, and just give myself the space and grace to just give it sort of like a platform and just go from there. I don't have to actually do something, but let me let it like live, because it's already there. And if I don't, it's just going to keep knocking anyways, you know?
Yeah. Well, you're giving yourself the permission to just show up as you, how you want to show up. And it doesn't mean it's like big or small. It doesn't mean you have to have these big lofty things. It can be, I just really like red lipstick and I want to wear red lipstick. That's okay. And just allowing yourself to just like not shame yourself for whatever your desires are. But I actually even want to take it back a little further when you were talking about women versus men and stuff, because I feel like this is where women truly have the power. Is good or bad, we are a lot better at holding different ideas at once and looking at different situations from different angles. And I think we do. I'm not saying we don't go into the ego, but I think we have a less of a tendency to just fire into the ego immediately and just respond out of a power position. We will like assess the situation more. We can multitask different ideas and different things. And this is where I think that we can really step into true power and change in this world, is if we use that in ourselves, which isn't necessarily recognized on the other side. And this isn't to say that men can't. There are definitely men that do that, but there is a system of power in the world that is that archaic the male power, masculine power, that's like very ego driven. But if we can come back to that feminine energy of being able to hold space for a lot of different narratives, which I think we are really powerful at, then a lot of change in this world can happen and a lot of more health and growth can happen.
100%. And if we look at like what the mind values, like performance, competition, like just kind of like our enculturation, especially in the US, this enculturation around like high performance drive, I feel like we're starting to see more trends now too that are much more feminine, of like that balanced state of like, actually sleeping, letting yourself take a nap, sleep in a little bit, take that vacation, set those boundaries, say no so you can say yes to yourself and explore different aspects. And I think things like growth, even though there can be like a very masculine aspect to that, it's also very feminine when it comes from that within of the true service of self and of world. It's so tied in. And I think a lot of times when we use the word I, people start to think selfish, right? Narcissistic.
Yes.
But I find that self-direction, cleaning up the slate where we're removing those shame walls, allowing us ourselves to be self-directed and accessing that inner compass is such a big part of actually allowing that equality to exist and bringing that balance to the entire world. So I think that that's such a true and an important point.
So do you think one of the biggest issues with the rise in mental health issues right now is a disconnection from self and our intuition and our inner compass?
I think you just nailed it. I mean, I think even just another aspect that, and this is a little bit of a sidebar, but you said the red lipstick thing, right?
Yeah.
And I think a big part of it is absolutely disconnection from self, but also letting ourselves be seen. But the way to actually do that is to see the self in a much more deeper way, connect with the self. Because if we begin to understand these protective mechanisms of being silent, freezing, avoiding, having to be right, all of these aspects, these survival mechanisms are stand in the way if we operate from them to that connection with self. So coming back home has a lot to do with understanding and having awareness and observing these parts. But at the end of the day, what you say goes. So if you choose to operate from your authentic self, then your life is in the balance that you bring to your world and the world is going to be that is a direct line to that change through that changing of the self. And I think it's important for people, it was certainly important for me to begin to understand these things of like choosing to connect versus disconnect. What does it look like when I uniquely disconnect? What does that look like? And even beginning to look at like, okay, what does it look like when I'm in a dark place, when I'm in an off place, when I'm operating from these parts of me? But what does it look like when I'm in this state of expansion, this light place, and maybe even making a list? So when we feel off, we just have a transition point. Maybe going on a walk helps us click into ourselves. It gives us just enough space to process different experiences and to connect. So I think getting really clear on dark and light and knowing that we grow from the dark, but the light is the gift and that we have always access to both. And where do we want to operate from? Where do we choose to make our choices from? So I think that that's certainly like the answer is to that step one, connection, step two, presence always, and then remembering that who, what, where, and then living it out to the best of our ability.
Well, I think you just said something that really hit home for me is thinking about when we're in those darker places, that's actually when we need to connect more. We need to connect through those hard spots. We need to connect through those challenges. We need to connect through those emotions, but we are so conditioned to disconnect because we don't want to feel it, because we don't want to go there. But that is where the change really happens. That's where our growth really happens. That's where we can really truly find who we are, is if we can connect in those positions. But so often we find disconnect. So as a way, like you said, of avoidance, of having to deal with things. And I think that has become our norm. Disconnection has become our norm, at least in the Western world. I don't know, I don't know where faith and spirituality and things like this are more normal in some cultures. I don't know if they experience, I mean, I'm not a doctor and I'm not a researcher, so I don't know if they experience as much, mental health issues that we do here, and anxiety and depression and things like that. But at least from what I see now, it's when we're not connecting is when this happens. But those are the times where we really need to connect the most.
Oh my gosh, I think you just nailed that too, because I had a mentor say to me once, it's not important what you feel, it's that you feel. And I started to think, well, why wouldn't we want to feel, right? And we don't know how to feel in a way that's constructive often. So we don't know how to feel in a way where it clears it out. We're not taught that emotions work on an arc, that they don't just stay the same. So we enter into a feeling and we're afraid it's never going to end. So of course I'm going to disconnect from it. That's just a sign of intelligence. I always paint this picture for my patients, like when you choose to connect and turn the light on, so often it's like entering a garage or an attic filled with boxes. And if we don't have the tools, or if we're not with ourselves enough to want to walk through that, or to have the courage to walk through those doors, the natural reflex would be to shut it and go into the room that's already cleaned up.
Yeah.
But if we have that sort of like walking beside ourselves and looking into the boxes, then we're able to actually let go of what doesn't work, replace and repurpose and develop what does. And then as we choose to be present, we actually begin to want to be present because that room becomes representative of who we are and where we want things to be placed. And so having that visual, I find, is really helpful because now it's not just this fear factor of see horror, shut door because I'm an intelligent, adapted, human being on this earth. It's more like that deep breath. Let me walk beside myself. Let me look through it. Me choosing for it to change is actually what creates the change. So I have this intention, and the companion commitment is simply to keep turning on the light, keep unpacking the boxes. That sort of like it takes what it takes mentality where I focus in on chopping wood, carrying water, actually those fundamental basics, even if it's as simple as let me place my hands on my heart for 3 seconds. Take a deep breath. I'm choosing this change in this moment. Maybe it's saying a quick prayer. Maybe it's choosing to eat a really balanced, healthy breakfast. Maybe it's choosing to go to sleep early that night, take a walk outside, whatever it is that feels like health to you, make a call to a therapist, check out the options for you specifically, whatever it is that feels like health for you in that moment, instead of if, then, when, remembering that we have this power to not just change then, not just wait for it, but instead of waiting on that fate, we can actually create. And I think that that's the biggest thing. Instead of waiting, I can actually create. I'm not disconnected from my power of choice and the ability to shift and alchemize this moment for myself. But in that, it is in such service of everyone you are around, every experience you touch as well. And that's how important you are. I mean, we can all, recall a moment where we're feeling off and the Whole Foods cashier just smiled at you like a beam of light. And that person has no idea how she changed my day. She has no idea that looking me in the eye made a difference. And I think it's important that we start to show up like we matter, because then we begin to look people in the eye. We begin to connect in such a different way. And when I feel off, I know it's important that I work with my state, shake it off to actually create that expansion. It becomes important. So I think that in general, just some thoughts there.
I mean, I love it. You're brilliant. I love that you brought Taylor Swift back in with the Shake It Off.
I love her.
That is so funny. Taylor Swift should be our own personal therapist. But if we are looking for help on this journey of connection and through ourselves and everything, how do we get in touch with you and follow along with you? Because you have so much wisdom in this space, and I just really love the energy and everything, the way you look at things. You've really actually helped me shift my mindset on a lot of this. And I think it's so valuable to find people like you that can really help walk us through this. So how can our listeners find you?
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me. I learned so much from this conversation as well. And I think the way you recap things is just completely eloquent and places it in a way that's digestible for people, including myself. And I just basically, people can find me. Everything is at Dr. Brooke Stuart. So DrBrookeStuart. Apparently it's spelled like Scottish, not the English for the Stuart part. So I hear. But drbrookestuart.com, at Dr. Brooke Stuart on all the social medias. So.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to put all that information in the show notes so you're easy to find. And I truly appreciate this conversation. And I love the couple of times that we've already been able to talk. So I hope we can keep our conversation going.
Thank you so much, Courtney.
And that's it for today's Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you, Dr. Brooke Stuart, for such an enlightening and brilliant conversation. I love everything she's doing in the world. I love how she's helping us connect, get more presence, and really walk ourselves through this human experience that we're having. If you want to connect with Dr. Brooke, I'll put all the information of how to get in touch with her in the show notes below. And as always, you can find Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers and Intentional Media on our website at CourtneyMyers.com. That's where you'll find our books, our courses, and everything else we have going on. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.